Hello everyone and welcome back to TTRPG Tuesday. I'm Trix and today we're going to continue our series on Spelljammer, which is a setting from AD&D or D&D 2nd edition. We're going to look at some Spelljammer ships now. This is basically the overview of chapter 2, but we're going to do a little more lore based than the, let's say, mechanics based that chapter 2 was. Now chapter 2 was basically just a load of pictures of ships with some stats. Those stats are basically only usable in AD&D, and well, let's just talk about the lore beyond the ships, to be honest. As I said, in Spelljammer you need a ship with a Spelljammer helm. A helm works by a wizard or a cleric channeling magical energy into the helm to make a motive force, basically to push it forward, to make it fly. They both, major and minor helms, both work this way, and depending on how big the ship is, the tonnage of the ship means how many helms you have. Now there is a calculator out there for how many helms per tonnage that you need. Roughly, a minor helm can move 50 tons, a major helm can run 100 tons. Both helms can move a minimum of 1 ton. So this is basically just a rough estimate of how they work. All Spelljamming helms are basically copies of the original helm, which is an artifact which the Arcane held. The Arcane are a blue-skinned race of psionic individuals who have some sort of gestalt consciousness. If you hurt one, you hurt all of them, and you make an enemy of all of them. There are several other helms that move ships forwards. Number one is the Series helm. This is a Mind Flayer helm that has been adapted to use spell abilities. It's not as good as a Spelljammer helm. It can only run between a major Spelljammer helm, shall I say. It can only move between 5 and 50 tons. All helms are much better, made by the Mind Flayers. They can move up to 200 tons. The Orbus, on the other hand, is invented by our friends, the Beholders, or the Eye Tyrants, rather, or whatever, or yeah, whatever they're called now, Beholders. This is a living entity that can only do between 20, 2 can do 40, but they can only ever have a maximum of 3. The Orbuses are only crewable possibly by Beholders. There's not much lore behind whether other races can use them. A few other races do have other helms, such as Dwarves. They have Forges, which can do between 100 and 700 times. The Forge made by Dwarves can only do between 100 and 700 tons. This means dwarf ships tend to be much larger, especially because of the way they work. They are literally basically forged using like forging magic into the helm itself and making it go forwards. This is a rather exhaustive process that takes multiple people to do. Gnomes, on the other hand, their engineering and their technology doesn't have, well, if you look at it, it shouldn't work. It just looks like a while of cogs and springs and bits of metal bammed in together, and it does work. Gnomes, on the other hand, tend to have very small vessels, and their ships seem to defy the laws of nature, both in look and propulsion. The Crown of Stars, on the other hand, is a legendary helm which nobody exactly knows how much it can push or the minimum it can do. This is part of a campaign which we'll all look at later. Chronuses, on the other hand, are a very early form of Spelljamming helm. It basically, you put magical items in it and it burns them and destroys them. Most furnaces are very temperamental and they can risk exploding at a 1 in 4 chance, and they cause between, well, damage to the people and the items. Most of them can be found on wrecks now, especially on asteroids or in planets. They can be used only within the crystal sphere. They can't be used in the phlogiston, which is the area behind the spheres that hold the worlds in. There's various rumours that maybe the Arcane developed them before they got their hands on the Prime Helm or the first Helm. The Artifurnace, on the other hand, is the modern day development from the Furnace. This is a sort of, again, a magical artifact. It says that it can power by a rating of 5, but again, there aren't many rules around for these. Going from that, there are the Life Jammers, made by the Neogi, which took 1d8 hit points from the creature and provide motive force. The ship's rating, basically, so if you have a wizard and you bung him in the helm, you basically have to divide by 8. So a 6th level wizard divided by 8, that's how much, and you'll obviously get a minus factor, but that's the minus factor of the how much propulsion that it will give. A death helm is identical to all of the other helms, but it does again drain the life of people. This is powered by a sentient individual. The individual must be charmed, and it has their life force taken them. It doesn't do it on the same way as Life Jammers, as it seems to drain them much more slowly. The only races that tend to use them are the Zorn, apparently, who we'll get to another time. The Pump Helm is probably the last helm that we will talk about. It's another one that must be fed materials. This is usually coal or wood or whatever, and it's much slower than other ships. This is usually used by goblins or other races that don't have access to the Arcane, simply because of how vicious and violent they are. There are non-magical engines, again, like the Pump Helm, but they are very slow, and you need multiple of them to breach basically the atmosphere. There is a calculation out there. Basically, you have to times it by 4. So if you had a ship that required 100 tons, you would need 4 non-magical engines to power that ship, basically. All ships basically run on the either one of those engines, and there are multitudes of ships out there. The only difference is the original Spelljammer ship, which it's named after, not the helm, but the ship, the living ship, that can propel itself without anyone at its helm. But if it does, then they form a symbiotic relationship, which then spawns mini jammers, which are smaller versions of the Spelljammer vessel. Okay, so we've looked at the helms, which power the vessels. These are, as I said, they're divided by race. Most of them are traded by the Arcane, as I've said. The dwarves, gnomes, goblins, beholders, and mind players tend to have their own, as do the Neogi. We will come to the Neogi and the Clockwork Horrors and how they get around at some point. I hope that's been enlightening to you on the Spelljammer helm. Ships on themselves can look like anything. Now, there are some examples in the book, and I will post some examples here so you can have a look at them, but it really doesn't matter on the look of the ship. You just need to know the tonnage of the ship and work out how many helms that you want in it. Smaller ships obviously use smaller helms, smaller helms or engines. Bigger ships need multiple, so if you're gonna have like a 700-ton ship and you're not a dwarf party, or have convinced a dwarf captain to take you various places, you're going to need a lot of helms. You're going to need at least 7 major helms, roughly, or 14 minor helms, just to power your ship. That means you're going to need between 7 and 14 wizards. And remember, every time a wizard uses the helm, it can't cast spells for 24 hours afterwards. So, or a cleric on the other end. You can get helms which are allowed to be powered by other wizards or other spells, but they are very few and far between, and they are usually supplement by supplement based. There we go. We've looked at some ship helms. We have discussed the type of ships that they might be in. For example, the orbs for the beholders, or the nautilus for the death, the mind flayers themselves. The Neogi have their death helms, and they have their very small ships. And the other ships basically are, if they're not constructed by the arcane, they're outfitted by them. They are a very interesting race that we will get to, not next video, but the video after, when we will look at the races in Spelljammer itself. Thank you everyone. That's my TTRPG Tuesday video. That's become more about the Spelljammer helm than the vessels themselves, but it's important to note that the helms are more important to the vessel than the vessel itself. Thank you everyone for watching. Take care of yourselves, and bye bye.